it takes time, it takes patience, and it actually requires respect to deal with people who you might not agree with or with whom you don't relate. There's no doubt there are people in every sector, in every walk of life, who just want to be cranks. They just want to whinge and moan and bitch, and that's life. But, if you don't make an effort to engage and bring people on board and build understanding, and actually, again, a bit of humility, like from say the executive, I don't actually know everything about horses, or in some instances, I don't know anything about horses. So I need to listen to the people who are shoveling the, SH1T day in, day out.
Mhm.
Like, because most people in the horse industry are not wealthy, they're not making a big living from it. They are getting by, they're subsisting in many instances, but they're doing it day in, day out. You want to look out in my field here, and it's all flooded at the moment because of the level of rain over the last couple of days. Like, it is tough running an equine enterprise in Ireland. It is really tough. The weather, the conditions, the lack of facilities. And so you have to have some sort of respect for the people who do it. And I think that's lacking, frankly. I think the lack of respect for the people who actually are the industry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Changing Rein. And in this episode, we're absolutely delighted to have with us Lucinda Creighton, who is well known in Irish political circles and in Irish equestrian circles. So it's a big pleasure for us to have someone of her experience and background, because in this particular season, we're very interested in the bigger picture stuff. How are decisions and policies made around governance of horse sport, of where we're going, and does it come from the ground up? Does it come from the governing bodies? And we thought no better placed person to share with us her experiences, both on the political stage and then in horse sport governance, and just generally to talk about where she sees it, given her background with ponies growing up in the west of Ireland, and then now with Pony Mad Kids. It's great to see the next generation coming along. So thank you for joining us, Lucinda, and we're looking forward to the chat.
Well, thanks so much, Mita and Karen. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
I suppose we should jump into the public service thing first, because I think there are some people cut out for public service and other people who run a mile. They cannot understand why anyone would do anything like that. Why would you stand yourself up there to be shot down? What is it? What drove the young Lucinda, and you were very young, I think, when you joined our national parliament, what drove you on to do that?
God, yeah. I mean, I suppose it is a tough career, and it's probably getting tougher. And I think that's probably the case everywhere. And we need good people to put their head above the parapet and run for elected office. But it's a bit of a viper's nest, unfortunately. What prompted me? I suppose, I mean, I just grew up in a home where we talked about politics a lot. My mum was a primary school teacher and really interested in it. I guess that's not unusual. Teachers can often be political, and they maybe bring the conversations home from the staff room, So I suppose that's what kind of initially piqued my interest. And, back in the 1980s, we didn't have multi-channel Sky and whatever. We had like a few channels, and so the news was on in our house all the time, and I just took a big interest in it. I thought there was a lot of intrigue around politics, and that sort of was what piqued my interest initially, and obviously just the idea of public service. I mean, I probably wouldn't have articulated it like that as a 7 or 8-year-old kid, but just the idea of trying to make your country a better place. I mean, I think children are generally quite idealistic, and I suppose I was too. I mean, it's probably been beaten out of me since, but it's important, and I've always felt that public service is really important, and somebody has to do it. And it was just a big passion of mine, and it remains a big passion of mine. And my work day to day very much centres around policy making and public affairs. So, I'm just on the other side of the fence, I suppose, but it really matters to me. So yeah, that's kind of how it all started.
And in terms of, this is probably a big question, but where can you be most effective? I'm sure we've all got involved in various local. I remember I was on our school board of management, things like
Mm.
that. Where can you be most effective, or where do the barriers start to come in? I mean, people would say, "Oh, but she was a government minister; she had the power; she could make things happen." So, and by the same token, the government or the governing body, if it's a equestrian body, they get pilloried when they don't make things happen. And people say, "Oh,
Mm.
we should rise up; we should have grassroots power." Uh, Look, maybe it's too big a question, but what do you think? Where's power most effective?
Uh, I'll hedge my bets and say it depends. I suppose at different levels, you have different roles. And I mean, boards of management and schools are really important because they make critical decisions about how those schools operate. I haven't volunteered myself for that one now yet, I have to say, but uh, I mean, I served as a city councillor, as a national parliamentarian, and as a government minister. And funny, I was only taught I met my husband through politics, and we were literally talking about this yesterday. We were driving through Mallow, the town that he once represented, and he pointed to a barrier that he'd had erected. He said that was my first achievement as a county councillor, like back in the 1980s or something. And I said, it's funny. They are the things that you remember where you actually did something tangible, concrete. It didn't change the world, but you can actually visually see it. And the people who live in that place where that barrier is, which is really to protect children from going out into the road, they probably remember it. So I found my time on Dublin City Council to be really rewarding. I really enjoyed it. You have limited powers as a councillor, but they're generally around planning and the planning process, and I was really interested in that. And so I found creating a development plan for Dublin City really really energizing. Frustrating at times, of course, but really really interesting and concrete. Um, I found my time in Parliament less so. And that's maybe a reflection on our system. The Irish parliamentary system is similar to Westminster. I mean, it's modelled on Westminster. And I think Parliament has allowed itself to be very neutralised. But Parliament has very little power in terms of moving the dial, influencing outcomes on regulation, legislation, and particularly if the government has a decent majority. And so I found opposition really frustrating. You could spend hours and hours and hours in parliamentary committees, and nobody would really know the difference. And it didn't matter what amendments you tabled to legislation; they were never going to be accepted by the government, so they were kind of pointless. On the other hand, I found my time in government really rewarding, fascinating, eye-opening, and I felt that you could get things done, and I was there during, a point of crisis, I suppose. Ireland had entered an IMF bailout programme. The government was scrambling to, salvage Ireland's reputation and concretely improve the terms of our IMF bailout, which was critical for the country, for our future economic recovery. And so, I really felt that we made a difference. It was difficult. We were pilloried, and the things we had to do were not popular. But I mean, arguably, in hindsight, they worked because, Ireland has one of the strongest economies internationally and one of the most successful economies in Europe. But that, so I suppose it depends where you are and the levers available to you. And, I would argue that certainly we need parliamentary reform to make Parliament more effective. I spent a lot of time. I never served in the European Parliament, but I spent a lot of time there over the years, and I continue to observe it closely in my current role. And I see that as a much more effective Parliament, where you have to achieve compromise, where parliamentarians actually do their job and influence policy outcomes and regulation in a way that our national Parliament doesn't. So I suppose I've sort of seen it from all sides.
Mm-hmm. I was doing a little bit of, as we all do, a little bit of a Wikipedia search before you came on, and I saw a little thing about you that I didn't realise. When you were Minister of State for European Affairs, you visited every EU member state and candidate states as well. And I thought that was a very interesting thing to do. You could have met them in Brussels or met them wherever, but you actually physically went to those countries. And I thought, yeah, sometimes that's what you need to do, because
Yeah,
in the environs of a parliamentary, city, wherever the center of power is, it's one
yeah.
thing, but it's meeting people where they're at is a whole other thing.
Absolutely. And I suppose there's a few things to that. I mean, one was we were really trying to rebuild Ireland's reputation. So we were our name was not good at European level, and some of it was mythology and some of it was probably deserved. But we really needed to build allies, and it was important that we didn't just go to Berlin and Paris because they're the big beasts and you need their support. It was really important that we rebuilt our relationships with similar countries to Ireland, the smaller and medium-sized countries that traditionally we had very good alliances with, and we needed to build alliances with for the future. So to me, it was really important because yes, you can meet a minister, your counterpart in Brussels, but when you go to the capital, you also meet the parliament. You might meet the mayor. You meet others. I often met with civil society groups, and others. So business, etc. So you actually got a much richer flavor of what was making that country tick, and you also helped to diffuse an understanding about Ireland, about our predicament, about what had gone wrong, but also what we were doing to rebuild, and that was extremely important. And I remember talking to the former Prime Minister of Slovakia, and he's still actually involved in the European People's Party, which is the political group that I belong to. But he every time I met him, he used to say, "And how is Bertie Ahern, our former Taoiseach Prime Minister?" And he really remembered, because he was Prime Minister coming into the big round of enlargement of the EU in 2004. And he remembered that our Taoiseach Prime Minister had not just visited Bratislava and built a relationship with the country, but had actually committed Irish resources. So people from the Irish Civil Service went and helped the Slovaks to prepare for their EU membership and to build the capacity before they joined the EU. So it was really tangible and concrete. And, a lot of things that I would disagree with Bertie Ahern on, but I would give him full credit for that foresight to think ahead, to think these are going to be 10 new member states, and actually Ireland needs to have a relationship with them, and let's go and see how we can help. And I just thought that was, look, he was famously a very, very clever politician, but he wasn't just clever, looking at his constituency in Drumcondra or at the domestic scene, but he was really clever internationally as well. And that just really, it's just something that really sticks out in my mind, that had such an impact. And I think actually, when the economy is going well, it's easy to forget about those sort of things. But actually, it's the good times and the bad times. You need to think about your friends, your partners, and building relationships. And that is what human nature is about. And it's what politics is about. And there's no substitute for it.
So it sounds to me, Lucinda, like you've had a lot of experience sort of rebuilding the reputation of Ireland after the financial issues that the country had. How would you say, or really, I guess what I'm trying to link the two between that and the horse industry, because arguably the horse industry is struggling a little bit with its reputation at the moment. So how can that experience that you've had in that political sphere translate to the horse world?
I suppose the same principles probably applies, building understanding, educating, not taking anything for granted, not assuming knowledge, and also being a little bit humble, and I think you need a little bit of all of the above in any circumstance. But certainly when I look at equestrian sport, equine sport, whether you look at show jumping and the equestrian sport or sport horse side of things, or horse racing and thoroughbreds, there can be a perception that it's elitist, that it's a little bit maybe cocooned, and which of course is certainly not the case in Ireland. I mean, it's a very, it's very much part of our DNA. It's very much part of our society, our culture, particularly obviously in rural Ireland. But sometimes we allow people to forget that. So I think it's about explaining and linking the industry, the sport, and just the cultural dimension with what is really essentially a part of the fabric of society, and also having the foresight to say we don't have all the answers. This is a complex area, and everybody's learning all the time. So whether it's a governing body or whether it's government, when legislating, not saying we have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers, but actually we do our best. We learn from the evidence and what we see, and we try and strike a balance, which ensures that that the industry, that the sport can continue, but doing so in a really responsible way. And I suppose that is about communication, explanation, and connecting to the communities where horses are such an important part of life.
Mhm. When I was setting up this interview, I was thinking that actually I think the two of you have a similar background. Karen often describes her childhood growing up riding ponies in the bush. Now, there's not much bush in Mayo, but same kind of
There's plenty of
picture.
bog though.
Bush or bog, it's all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so much
Uh,
time there's this vision of this elitist, as you say, snobby kind of horse culture, which actually is not the case. I think the two of you could share stories about the things you got up to on your ponies way back.
yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, look, that's it. And I mean, I suppose my background, my parents weren't horsey really. I mean, my dad had an interest, but they'd never had horses. He was a bookie actually. So, we saw a lot of horse racing at home, but I mean, for me, it was the classic, little girl with the dream of a pony. I went for riding lessons, and from the first day, I think I was 4, I was brought along because my sister was having lessons. She didn't particularly enjoy it, and I was just obsessed, and I just loved it, and begged and begged and begged for years to get a pony. And I can assure you, the pony that we we eventually got was not an expensive pony. It was like, it was very basic from a riding school, but I mean, it, like, to me, that's what I remember from my childhood. Like, it was that absolute, connection, and out after school every evening riding. My friends came, whether they liked ponies or not, they were getting up on the pony, or they were washing the pony's tail, or we were out doing some building jumps. We just, my cousins who lived in Dublin came down, and we used to just go off riding for the whole day, literally down to the bog. Like, there was a bog near my house, and we would ride to the bog. We'd bring a picnic, and we'd set up and jump the ponies over logs and whatever. Like, so it was that absolute passion. And I think, like most horse people, and it is the vast majority of horse people, I mean, the horses were our obsession. So we did nothing to harm them. It was quite the opposite. The ponies were treated better than any member of our family. And that is how it is for most people who are involved in the equine business. They're people who've come from that background of total passion. You don't do it otherwise. The passion, the love, the care, that's what makes you tick. And you have this bond with this animal or animals, and that's first and foremost. Everything you ask Santa Claus to bring you at Christmas is for the pony. So, like, that's kind of how it started for me, and I think it's how it starts for most people.
One of the things that, like, I certainly have such fond memories of growing up with ponies in my life, and we certainly, I 100% agree with you about the passion and the commitment, and how it really, as a child, it was really my whole world, and I think it is for many people, as you describe. But I do look back on those times and I think of some of the things that we did with our horses that as an adult and as someone who's studied welfare, I think, oh gosh, there are some things there that I think, oh, I wish now maybe I hadn't done some of those things. So I wonder how you mentioned before about education and communication and connection. Where do you think learning sort of fits in with that and sort of that evolution within our industries?
So I think that's a really excellent point. And, I think there was a lot of ignorance. So on the one hand, this love and passion for the animals, but we definitely didn't know as much then as we do now. And, when I look back and I think about maybe like I show jumped, that's kind of my big interest. And you think about ponies stopping and they might get a boot or a belt of a whip or whatever. And actually these days, if a pony stops, well, you're getting the chiropractor, you're getting the physio. So the knowledge is so much different. So, like I don't think I was aware that you could get a physio for a horse back then. It just didn't even arise, So certainly the broad level of knowledge is improved. I think there's a huge role for pony clubs in all of this. So where I grew up, we didn't have a pony club. So I learned in a riding school, and then once I got a pony, the pony came home, and I used to get books, mail order catalogue books. I had veterinary books, I had animal welfare books, how to train a show jumper books, how to do dressage book. Like I literally used to teach myself from books because there was no internet and no pony club. So my kids are, and I think the pony club has certainly a wider network of branches now. But our pony club, I'm on the committee for my sins. I don't do a whole lot because I'm very busy with work and I travel. But the education that children get through pony club, I think, is phenomenal. And their level of knowledge, is just light years ahead of what it was when I was growing up. So I think that's really positive. And I think if we're looking to the future of horsemanship and horse welfare, we've got to try and make sure that we're utilising that network. And I would say utilising the network of riding schools as well, which is dwindling, which is a big concern. And that's a conversation for another day. There's nothing being done to support riding schools, and the cost of insurance and their overheads. The commercial rates they have to pay in Ireland is outrageous. So they're shutting down everywhere. So we're actually going to have a far smaller pipeline of kids because not everybody can get a pony day one. Of course, if you come from a horsey family, like my kids, they've all had ponies since they were born practically, because we have them out here at the back of my house and that's easy. But for most kids, that's not an option. So if you don't have riding schools, you don't have children getting into the equine sector. So we need to think about how we use those as a launch pad for better awareness and better education, but it has certainly improved dramatically, I think. So that's a positive. But yeah, ignorance definitely abounded when I was growing up.
I think we're all guilty of that, and I love that phrase. When you know better, you do better. We can beat ourselves up and say, "Oh, we shouldn't have done it. We did not know any better." It's how it was, but it's remaining ignorant or willful ignorance in the face
exactly.
of advances in science and knowledge is that's where I think the biggest problem arises, because as you say, you've said it earlier, kids are they're open to ideas, they're idealistic. If you teach them the right thing to do, that's what they will do. They're not tainted by all the baggage we carry. So yeah, there's a huge opportunity there.
I have to share with you, Lucinda, I was like you. I used to get books and try and teach myself and things, but all the books were written by people in the UK. So they would be filled with photographs of these beautiful lush green pastures and all sorts of things that just looked so unfamiliar to what it looks like here in Australia where I lived at the time. So it was a little bit surreal in some ways.
Yeah.
I'd look at these pictures
I
and
can relate to that.
Yeah, I think, oh gosh, why doesn't my place look like this? Was when it was sort of, lots of gum trees, and it was quite, where I grew up the soil was quite poor. So, we always struggled to have enough grass, and, and there'd be all this talk about, ponies being too fat. And it's like, oh, there's not many fat ponies. where I am. Yeah.
That's classic.
Yeah, it does show you
Yeah.
context matters too. We can talk from a position of whatever knowledge, but context for the people when they're in the situation they're in can be quite different. Um, Lucinda, after politics, you took on a role with Horse Sport Ireland, which I suppose in one way was a natural progression. With your background and your interest in that area. What particularly attracted you to taking up the role?
I suppose, very simply, lots of people asked me to. They thought it would be a good fit because of my background. I mean, I'm a lawyer as well, so I suppose, from the point of view of governance, which has obviously become very important in sporting bodies, and then my background in politics, just I suppose helping to build awareness and profile for the industry with policymakers. I think that was kind of a big part of why a lot of people asked me to go for it, and I did. And I mean, I like the other. I was a ministerial nominee, and actually, it's a funny one. It's not a state body, but it is almost exclusively state funded. So the Minister for Agriculture, in consultation with the Minister for Sport, appointed at the time, I think still does, 4 members to the board, and so. He previously could have just appointed, but they decided to have a kind of a process this time, which was good. So we were all interviewed about our background, our skills, etc., and we ended up with some really excellent people on the board, who knew a lot about the industry, and but also had experience outside of the horse industry, which I thought was great, and I thought we had a really good complement of board members, but it didn't really work out very well. So I found it very frustrating. I did not think that it was a well-run organization, and I still don't think it's a well-run organization. And in the end, it just, as a board member, I found that we were just effectively ignored continuously by the executive. We raised a lot of concerns about internal processes in the organisation and expenditure as well, given that it's taxpayer funded. We were just not being heard. So in the end, the whole board resigned. And I think, unfortunately, the issues remain much the same. And I think that's really unfortunate, because there's really very little buy-in from the people who know their stuff about horses and the people who are in the industry, whether it's across the disciplines, show jumping, eventing, etc., or the other parts of the equine sector in Ireland. There's a big chasm actually between the organisation and the people who are the lifeblood of the industry. And I think we wanted to be a bit of a bridge and build a better relationship, but there wasn't a whole lot of interest in that. So we resigned, and the issues continue, unfortunately.
It's a pity, isn't it? Because not only there might be internal strife, whatever, which stays within the building, but it's the loss of faith and the loss of trust amongst the stakeholders that is so difficult to regain. You can be having your internal fights and whatever is happening, but that leaks out. People know there's trouble in the house, and it's people, and that's so hard to build back up again. It won't be, a new board won't do that overnight. New processes, new procedures, new executives. It's just when trust in an and it's I notice it in lots of different spheres of the horse world. It's quite easy to blame the FEI, Horse Sport Ireland, horse racing, these anonymous entities, when actually there are people in there trying their best, working hard, maybe not getting on, maybe there's issues, but they're trying to work through them, but the pot shots are just coming at this nameless, faceless entity.
I mean, I think that can be the case for sure, and you see that like in all walks of life. You see it in political parties, actually. That's the exact same thing. Oh, headquarters did X, and therefore, but there has to be a willingness on both ends to engage. I mean, the response, for example, to the resignation of the board in HSI was to change the constitution to exclude representation from the industry. So, like, this is a headache, so here's how we solve it. We appoint a bunch of people from the corporate world who have absolutely no knowledge or interest in horses, and that'll solve the problem then.
Yeah.
So that's a lazy solution, and one that has just inflamed the relationship. Or lack thereof. And like, it takes time, it's back to the relationship point. It takes time, it takes patience, and it actually requires respect to deal with people who you might not agree with or with whom you don't relate. There's no doubt there are people in every sector, in every walk of life, who just want to be cranks. They just want to whinge and moan and bitch, and that's life. But, if you don't make an effort to engage and bring people on board and build understanding, and actually, again, a bit of humility, like from say the executive, I don't actually know everything about horses, or in some instances, I don't know anything about horses. So I need to listen to the people who are shoveling the, SH1T day in, day out. Like, because most people in the horse industry are not wealthy. They're not making a big living from it. They are getting by. They're subsisting in many instances, but they're doing it day in, day out. You want to look out in my field here, and it's all flooded at the moment because of the level of rain over the last couple of days. Like, it is tough running an equine enterprise in Ireland. It is really tough. The weather, the conditions, the lack of facilities. And so you have to have some sort of respect for the people who do it. And I think that's lacking, frankly. I think the lack of respect for the people who actually are the industry, are the lifeblood. And that's, the big equestrian facilities where they're, breeding the top show jumpers and eventers, and they're selling them all over the world. That's tough because the pressure, the cost, the overheads in those instances are probably a lot more profitable. But that is tough, right down to the, the farmer with the 2 mares or whatever, who's, plodding in and out, bringing them in and out with the muck up to their knees. Like, it is a tough, grueling business, and most people are doing it for the love of it. So I think the governing bodies have a duty to respect those people and to try to listen to them, encourage them, engage with them. And I don't see a lot of that happening.
Lucinda, I find that so curious because it sounds quite familiar. I'm not an expert on what happens with the equestrian bodies in Australia, but it does sound like quite a familiar tale. There just seems to be lots of upheaval with, special general meetings and things like that going on with boards and executive, etc. I'm just wondering, do you have any insight that you can share about what drives that disconnect? Like, what drives that, wanting to stay separate from the members and, trying to keep people who might know about horses and could actually contribute out of the organisation. It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. I'm just curious if you can shed any light on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a lot of factors. I mean, one is it's just hassle. You've got such a diverse range of stakeholders. And like, when I look at equestrian sport versus racing, I mean, racing is a little bit more straightforward. I say that now, and I'm sure there are plenty of people would disagree, but you've got flat, you've got national hunt, you've got fairly clear delineation. You go to the equestrian side of the sport, and you've got eventing, show jumping, dressage, para dressage. You've got the riding schools, you've got the pony clubs, you've got leisure horses, and then you've got all the stud books as well. So there's just so many more players to try to keep happy, and that's hard. It requires fairly significant diplomatic skills, and it's just more difficult. It's a headache. So if you can just cast them aside and not really bother, that's a lot easier. It's just a lot easier. And, I think the other point, which I'm not sure I have a simple solution to, is corporate governance. So, we've had mega scandals in Ireland in the sporting sector, in the charity sector, right? Of, misappropriation in the worst instances, and mismanagement, probably in a lot of cases, of resources. And so everything has tightened up in terms of corporate governance, which is appropriate. But the risk is that you end up with people who assume important roles because they can tick boxes on corporate governance as opposed to understanding the industry. And getting that balance right is really important. I don't think we have a good balance. Mm-hmm. So I can't say that's the case across every sporting organization, but certainly in some of them. So they become micro corporate governance managers, as opposed to, managers who have a vision for the industry or the sector, or the sport, as is the case when it comes to horses. It's a bit of everything, because it is an industry as well as a sport, which is unique. When you look at Swim Ireland or rugby or whatever, they're not okay. I suppose there is an industry building around a lot of these sports, but it's not an industry in the way that horses are, where they, you breed them to sell them, and you've all of that going on as well. So, I think the disconnect, because of the corporate governance requirements, the disconnect from the actual industry and the sport has become a problem. And I can't say I have the solution. I actually think that the way in which Horse Sport Ireland was set up and the way it had been reformed had the potential to maybe help to deal with that, because you had a board that had knowledge of the industry and wanted to engage and bring on board the industry and the people involved, the human beings that are involved in the industry. But the corporate speak one out, and that's now the kind of predominant, I think, force. It's do you have an MBA? Tick the box. Great, you've got an MBA. You can be hand selected to be on the board. What, have you ever sat on a horse? Have you ever mucked out or fed a horse? No. Oh, that's fine. That's a problem. You need a bit of both.
Yeah, I spent I think 9 years on the board of Horse Racing Ireland, and I think it'd be fair to say the ratio between the amount of time we spent dealing with corporate governance type issues and industry strategy issues has totally flipped in that 9-year period. I would have said back then it was probably 30% corporate governance stuff, and you'd live with that because you knew you were going to get onto the good stuff, the stuff that mattered, certainly to me.
Yeah.
But I would say
reason we're all there.
Yeah. And that by the time my term had finished, it was probably the other way around. And what worries me is that a board like Horse Racing Ireland, which is made of representatives, if you like, from constituent bodies, there isn't that knowledge or understanding of corporate governance coming up through those. So people are floundering, and people are not going to put themselves forward because it's just... And as you say, we're paying for the sins of others in other sectors, and it's like a straitjacket that kind of stifles progress.
Yeah, I think that's a really good sort of summary of how it has evolved. And it really worries me, because people just become so disillusioned. I mean, the people in the industry, then they become so disillusioned, and that then amplifies this sort of, oh, well, that's the government, that's HRI, that's HSI, that's what, and they become so removed, and they're not seen as problem solvers at all. Then the risk is that they're seen as the problem. And in fairness, as you say, there's so many good people working in those organizations, it's unfair. But I think that there has to be a little bit of interest from the funding partners, which is the government, and like the bottom line is the government is just not interested in this, like just zero interest, don't want to deal with it, hassle, another sporting organization that's causing problems, don't want to know. And then it blows up, and they're hauled into a parliamentary committee, and then they get even more annoyed with the sector, and more annoyed, and they even less interest as a result of it. I mean, I remember talking to a minister for agriculture one time who just said to me, I don't want to hear about horses. Don't want to hear about it, because I've had such a headache dealing with, the fallout of X issue. So they're not a priority. And when you look at the government department that has primary responsibility, which is the Department of Agriculture, it's not beef or dairy. So therefore it's not important.
Mhm.
And that's a problem.
Mhm. And is there a model anywhere that works, or can we can we find a model that does work?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I suppose I haven't probably studied the governance models in other comparable jurisdictions. I mean, they certainly do very interesting things around education in Germany, for example, and there's a lot of money pumped into it. So, from that side of things, I think we could learn a lot. In terms of the relationship with government and these governing bodies. I don't know. I mean, Ireland is very unique in a way because of the size of the industry here, and the relationship with government, the fact that it is so substantially funded by government. So that makes it a little bit unique. But I mean, I would bring it back to what can the industry do for itself? So like when I was on the board of Horse Sport Ireland, a friend of mine who's a brilliant ambassador for equestrian sport internationally, Barry O'Connor. So he's a coach, and he's a producer, and he sells horses all over the world. And he really worked extremely hard to build allies from across the industry in Ireland to go and talk to local parliamentarians, to educate them, to invite them to yards, to really see how it works, and to connect them, to plug them into the people in the industry in their constituencies. And I thought that that was a really worthwhile exercise, and I helped him with it as much as I could. And others really got motivated and got behind it around the country, but they just got fed up because they weren't feeling that it was maybe amplified or reflected at a national level from the governing body, and it sort of just stopped. And I think that was unfortunate because I think that really is important. And when I look at the Oireachtas now, the Parliament, compared to how it was 25 years ago, there are far fewer allies of the horse industry than there used to be. I do some work with HRI, so we're working on that, and there's a lot of I would say success actually in terms of reaping the rewards. So there's a lot more, I think, awareness now than there might have been a few years ago in terms of what the industry means to Ireland, to rural Ireland, and in terms of the economic contribution. But there was just a steep decline, I would say, over about 20 years. Like when I was first in the Dáil, in the Parliament, there were a lot of members, ministers, and parliamentarians involved in syndicates owning horses. For example, I was involved in one. As were a lot of my colleagues, and I would say the last 10 years that has dwindled significantly. So, and I think that's partly it's the urbanization of politics. So, parliamentarians getting elected from bigger urban areas and rural Ireland less represented. And I think that's a feature if you look at constituencies and where people are getting elected from. So they actually don't have a connection to farming of any sort, and particularly no connection at all to horses. So actually helping to bring it to life for those people really matters, because they're the TDs or members of Parliament of today are the ministers of tomorrow, so actually building an awareness I think is really important, and that I think is part of the responsibility of the governing bodies as well.
Just getting on to I suppose the main focus of our podcast, or where we're coming from on this, is the welfare perspective. Because we're in the bubble and we see so much that's been happening particularly in the last 3 or 4 years around equine welfare, probably since the Tokyo Olympics maybe. Do you see that as an issue for the people that you're interacting with, external to the horse world? Is it a concern for urban politicians? Is it a concern for people you'll meet in your business work, in your work?
Yeah.
Is it something that they are concerned about?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, animal welfare is, I mean, it came up as an interesting theme in our recent presidential election, for example. Animal welfare is a big priority for ordinary citizens and the people they elect. So yes, and I think it's really important for the horse industry broadly to demonstrate that they take it seriously. And not only do they take it seriously when a negative headline appears on a newspaper, on a panorama program, or whatever it might be, but consistently that they are striving and making every effort to raise standards, to raise the bar, and to ensure that those welfare issues that occur are minimized and that they are rare. And I think that's the key task, actually, to ensure that. Because I mean, look, there are people often with a political affiliation who would love to end all form of animal related sport. They just don't like it. And so there is a growing drive, and you see that they're international networks and they are coordinated, and they would love nothing more than to shut down horse racing or show jumping or eventing or whatever. And they don't care particularly that it's in an industry that sustains livelihoods and families in rural Ireland or rural parts of other economies. So that's a perspective, not one I agree with, but it is a perspective, and it's a growing perspective. So it has to be counteracted if we want to see a future for horse-related sport and activity. And the best way to counteract it is to demonstrate that standards are improving and that collectively the industry is striving for those better standards. And I go back to my point at the very beginning about me as a little girl with the pony that I begged for 4 or 5 years that I finally got. Nothing was more important to me than the welfare of my pony. I might have known a lot. We definitely know more today, as we've agreed. But we need to show that is the case for the vast majority of people who care for horses, who have horses on their property, at their home, in their yard, and we don't need to just show it. We need to live it. We need to prove it, and we need to make sure that in everything we do, privately at home, in our bases where we keep the horses, and also when they're out competing, whether it's a race course, whether it's the Dublin Horse Show, whether it's Aachen, that those standards are maintained wherever you go, and it's improving.
And I met someone recently someone within the horse world, and I mentioned social license. I said, this is how important it was. And the response was, if you lot, I don't know who that is, but anyway, if you lot would stop talking about social license, it would go away. And I'm just wondering whether you see within the horse world, you're at competition with your kids at the weekends. Do you see an awareness? Is it, are people aware that we need to be doing what you've just said? We need to be constantly improving, monitoring, knowing what we're doing, showing what we're doing. Is that awareness there within the horse world? It maybe it's external, but are we doing enough internally?
That's a really good question. I think people know it. I'm not sure that it's promoted in a coordinated way. So there's probably more that, again, the governing bodies, the organizations behind the sport could do to communicate that maybe a bit more consistently, so that people are thinking about it. I mean, I actually think, like, we go to weekend shows where we stable overnight, and I mean, the level of care that I witness for the ponies that are at those shows. I mean, people are up at 6 a.m, nearly tickling their ponies and feeding and grooming and watering and making sure, because you need everything right if you're competing. So it's sort of, it's par for the course. I've never witnessed ever a welfare issue at a pony show in Ireland. And I can say that hand on heart now. I can't say they don't arise, but I've never seen it. And all I see are kids and parents, morning, noon and night, doing everything to make sure that those ponies are well looked after. I would say the parents are more concerned about the ponies than they are about the children a lot of the time. So, but is it sort of communicated so that it's there to the forefront of their minds? I would say, no, probably not. It's not It's not highlighted. You might see that a bit more in racing, actually,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe because racing has been so much more in the spotlight. Um, but I think it would be a valuable thing to do to maybe run more awareness campaigns. Interestingly, there's been a lot of awareness campaigns around mental health with pony riders, which is good. And I would give credit to the likes of Show Jumping Ireland for doing a lot of work around that. Because obviously, you know, mental health issues, depression, and indeed, unfortunately, suicide have been features, as they are, I suppose, across society. So they're the sort of campaigns that I've seen taken up, as opposed to the animal welfare campaigns. But I think it would be good to see more of that.
Well, I suppose the biggest revelation for me, I mean, I came from your standard thoroughbred industry background. I never really thought very hard about welfare, except that because I was a vet, I assumed I was taking care of those horses. I must be very much a welfare focused person. But the biggest revelation for me was the realization that welfare is actually about the mental health of the horses or the animals, as well, their physical health. That was a huge light bulb moment for me. And I think if we're going to promote welfare, it needs to probably move beyond the care, which absolutely I agree is, we are world leaders in how we care for our horses. But are we looking after their mental well being as well? I think that's the next step in the journey. And I think with the focus nowadays on children's mental health, adolescent mental health, I think that resonates with people. I think we've an opportunity there to say, well, listen, we care about the mental health. We don't overface them. We give them their friends, their forage, their freedom. We take what their needs are into consideration, rather than just using them as tools of a very enjoyable pursuit.
Yeah. And I think that's there as an underlying part of how we care for our animals. Again, is it highlighted, or are people consciously thinking of it as a part of that broader animal welfare thing? Maybe not. But again, back to to the sort of competition side of things where we are, if a pony doesn't get a break, if a pony doesn't get some field paddock time, they'll sour. So, and I suppose it's drawing the connection as well, so that people understand that a happy animal will compete better, will do better, etc. I definitely think awareness has just grown exponentially on that front over the last number of decades, like exponentially. But there's probably still work to do in terms of that piece of education. Like, here we are in December now, and everyone is leaving their ponies off for probably 6 to 8 weeks complete break. Gives everybody a break. That's the time of year. But you see, like, I certainly see it with friends who are competing across the year, and the seasons now are so much longer than they used to be. The season goes from February to December, so it's not a season; it's multiple seasons. But like, you do see people, giving their ponies 2 or 3 weeks break in the middle of the summer, maybe after they've done qualifiers for the RDS or whatever, and maybe again after the national championships. So like, they do give breaks throughout the year, and most people will have paddock time for their ponies. They're not keeping them in all the time. It's rare enough, I think. Probably more education around that, again, so that people are consciously thinking of it, I think would be beneficial. I think a campaign around welfare and why it matters, not just to the horse, but also to the wider world.
Well, actually, that was the basis of Karen's PhD research, because she looked at the impact of horse welfare on rider safety. And if anything matters, you say that the parents worry more about the ponies than the kids. But obviously, if they think that the safety of their children is going to be impacted by the welfare of the pony, it's a very powerful message. So, Karen, it
really is
an opening for you and your work.
I also looked at the relationship between welfare and rider satisfaction, and found that riders of horses that had better welfare actually enjoyed their riding experience more as well. So I think that's another little string to the positive message for people for, looking at welfare and really taking it seriously.
Lucinda, we have a genie in this studio, this virtual studio. So she's a virtual genie, but she will grant you any wish connected to the horse world. What would you ask her for? What would be the one thing you would ask her for?
Well, besides a 160 Grand Prix horse for myself to compete, I mean, for me, what I would love to see is a much better balance in terms of the voice and the involvement of the people on the ground, the people who are looking after these horses day in, day out, and who have something to contribute. They may not have, a PhD or an MBA to be able to contribute to, the perfect minutes from a meeting, but they are the people who know their horses, feel for their horses, and who do the grunt work. And I would love to see them valued and really encouraged to participate in a meaningful way in decision making around the industry. And that would then work both ways, I think, because there would be a really, really strong value from an education point of view and a communication point of view, downward, filtering out to the whole of the industry. I think if people don't have a sense of ownership, then they just switch off and they disconnect, and it leads to resentment and it leads to alienation. And that is what I really fear is a problem at the moment. So if I had my wish, that's what I would see. I would see a much better system form of governance that would include the voice of the people who know most about their horses.
Yeah, that resonates with us. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Lucinda. That's been a really thought-provoking and inspiring, and really I got a lot from it, and I think it really fits the theme of this particular series, which is about the bigger picture. How is our horse sport, our horse industry, how is it governed? How can we make it a better place? How can we involve people? So thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And look, it's been hugely thought-provoking for me as well, so I've really enjoyed it, and thanks for the excellent questions and the great discussion. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lucinda. Great to meet you and great to chat.